I think. Great.
Okay,
Let's have
great.
fun
Thank you, Ching.
first.
Hi, Leanne.
Hey, I'm just now
And,
figuring this out. I'm not too
I'm
swift.
gonna make you a
Yeah,
co-host.
I'm using using my iPad mini for the first
are a
time to Zoom,
co-host.
so it's a little different.
Well, I want to say
Oh,
a quick
Salome,
hello to Tanya.
Yes, Dr. Tia.
Where are you all?
There she
Tanya
is.
and Salome, where in the world are you right now?
So I am in Georgia, Tbilisi.
Okay.
4:30
Yes.
p.m. AM right now.
Yes, it's 2:30 here
In
in the
Istanbul,
morning.
in Turkey, right? Yeah.
In the morning.
Yeah.
Tanya,
Hi,
where are you?
I missed
Hi.
you so much, Dr. Howard, Dr. Black.
Oh,
Oh,
and
no. Here we are. We're all together. Tanya, are you in
It's 1:32 a.m.
1:32. Yeah.
Mozambique? Or are you traveling?
No, I'm home. I'm in Mozambique, Maputo City.
Yeah. Yep, very good. So I'm in Denver.
Oh, okay.
Yeah.
Okay. Welcome, Jason.
Is everybody freezing?
Welcome, Clark. Welcome, Stephen. We're just giving people a few minutes to get here.
From a technical point of view, happy with this one?
Yes, Jason.
All right, I'll pop out and check in on some of the others. Have a good meeting.
Okay.
Thank you. I can't tell if some screens are frozen.
No, we're not frozen here, Leanne.
I'm just checking on something else for the conference. I'll be right back.
Yeah, Leanne, I don't see anybody frozen. I think that's on your end.
Am I frozen?
No, you're not. So I
Okay,
think
well,
you're
okay,
having
then I'm just gonna pretend I'm-
lag
Yeah.
Okay.
on the internet. Okay. If we don't get started here soon, I'm gonna fall asleep. Oh man, I'm not used to staying up this late. I haven't done an all-nighter in ages.
Yeah.
Ah. Who's gonna go first? And second and third and fourth? Leanne, do you know you're our fearless leader? Oh, Leanne, you're muted.
We can just go in the order in the program. Is that okay with everyone?
Yeah, I don't have the program right in front
That
of me.
would be
What does that mean?
Me, Salome, Tanya, and Chad.
I'm last. Okay. Wake me up.
Me, then Salome. Then yeah, and you would be last. We'll try to be exciting for you, Chad.
Well, it's not you. It's me. It's all me.
Oh.
Ah.
Oh.
I should mute myself. Can we start?
I thought Dr. Howard was going to start, correct?
Can she start?
I can do that. We still have a few minutes on my phone until we start, though. Should we wait?
Yeah, I have 6:36 here, American time.
And it starts at 1:45.
Oh, really? We start at 1:45?
That's what I
I
have.
didn't know that. Okay, I didn't know that.
That's what I have.
Okay. Salome, have you been making that one kind of thing what is that called again? That where the pot and you stir it, the Georgian.
You
It's
mean the
sweet.
food?
Yeah,
Oh,
that's
pelamushi?
sweet.
Pelamushi. Yeah. So good.
Have you
It's my
made any of
favorite
that?
from. Yeah, of course. We make especially for like holidays. But I had a guest
Yes.
last week, and she asked me to make this especially for her. So yeah, we can make it. It's very easy. So we can make it every time we want. Very
Okay,
cheap
so you
to
don't have to
make.
have the whole family around and the grandmother,
Well,
like in that
no.
video you showed me.
Yeah, no, yeah, it was like a ritual. But
Yeah.
typically my mom is capable to do it. So
Oh,
yeah.
that sounds fun.
Mm.
I never forgot that video and that
Oh my
taste.
gosh.
It's really good.
Yeah, I just remembered that I sent you this video after I let you to taste this. Yeah. Yeah, I just remembered that. It was fun.
I love the Turkish food here.
I know.
In fact, I'm
I
probably
love
putting
it.
on a few pounds.
Yeah, it has some extra amount of fat, but it's tasty.
Yeah,
So tasty.
yeah.
Yeah, I love their sweets, and I mean tea and coffee is my favorite.
Yes, the Turkish
And
coffee.
yes,
Hey,
and also
I can read Turkish coffee grinds, and I can tell you your future.
yeah.
A very old man taught me
Okay.
this, how to do that. An
Oh,
ancient
wow.
wise man.
Oh my god. Oh my gosh, I need to hear what's coming. So we can do this later after the conference. I miss
With
Turkish coffee.
coffee grinds.
Every time I stop by in Turkish airport, I always take this moment of like Turkish coffee ritual. It's just everything.
This was my first time in the Turkish airport, the new one, and you have to
Yes.
walk forever. Oh my gosh.
Yes,
It's so
huge.
huge.
Yeah, it is. Yeah.
I was used to the small one.
Yeah. Yeah, my first trip 7 years ago was from Turkish airport, the old one, Ataturk airport.
Yes, Ataturk.
And I was depressed. I remember my reaction. I wanted to cry because the amount of people I saw there, and the movement, and the differences, that I've never seen that diversity, I would say, of people and movement before. And I just wanted, take me to home. I just want to be with my mom. I was so frightened, but yeah, it was quite an experience. So
yeah.
did you try, Dr. Tip, did you try the Turkish fide?
The feta cheese?
No, it's
feta
not
cheese?
feta cheese. It's fide. It's called fide. It's like bread, and it has some filling inside. So it's
Yeah.
I don't know if
Yeah.
it has
it's-
cheese, sometimes mushrooms, sometimes meat.
they roll them up here and call them cigara. It's almost like a cigar,
okay.
but it's like
Cigars.
but it's what you're talking about with the rolled cheese and bread,
Not
and then
not
it's
really.
fried.
It's more like pizza, but Turkish style of pizza, I would
Pita.
say.
Pita.
Yes, that's what I'm
Pita.
talking.
Yeah. Oh
Pita.
yeah. Pita.
Did you try it?
Okay. Yeah, I know. Yeah. Yeah, I know
Yeah,
pita.
so good. So good. Yeah, unique
Uh-huh.
taste.
Yeah.
Mhm.
And yeah, I've been going to the beach, the Mediterranean. It's amazing.
wow.
The amount of
Beautiful
salt in the
water.
water. You just
Mhm.
float. You cannot sink.
Yes. Yes. Yeah.
It just keeps you so buoyant.
Mm-hmm.
Is it time yet, Leanne?
What
Tanya,
time is
how's
it in the
Mozambique?
US? Oh, sorry.
42.
6:43.
Oh, okay.
How's Mozambique, Tanya?
Hi, Dr. Chet. Hi, everyone, once
Hi.
again. There was a long time I don't see Dr. Howard,
Yeah.
Dr. Black.
Hello.
And it's a pleasure to meet you all here. And Mozambique is going well.
Yeah, good.
She's also experiencing some issues, internet.
We are facing the third wave of COVID again. So from till August, yeah. So we are trying to deal with that. Everything is normal.
Yeah.
That's good to hear.
All right, Chad, if you want to get us started, we can start the panel. It's time. It's official time.
Okay, Leanne called it. So let's go in order. Do you want to introduce everything, Leanne?
Okay. I hadn't planned on it, but I can. Would you like
Okay.
for me to?
Yeah.
Tanya, are you the chair?
Oh, I thought Dr. Chet said he was the chair, but no. Okay, so once again, hi everyone. We are here together to talk about the stories we tell, oral histories, political caricature, and journalism. And for this panel, we have Leon Howard from USA, Salome Abkazishvili, sorry, from Chai Kana Media, me, Tania Mashonis from Eduardo Mondlane University, and Chad Yu from USI as well. And I will follow the order here from the presentations, and I will invite Dr. Len Hart to present. You have 15 minutes, and I wish you good luck.
Thank you. So in January 2020, I received a sabbatical leave to work on a book-length manuscript looking at oral histories as a kind of public history. And what I was really interested in is what happens to the stories after they've been collected, after they've been transcribed and cataloged and ascension into a library or archive. Really looking at the way stories are more than a supporting resource for historians, and scholars studying social history, but to look at the different ways those stories can be shared, with focus on writing in ways that communicate the social history, but also the impact of the experiences that are conveyed in those stories. If you survey most oral history books, textbooks, they're often community guides that tell you a little bit about how to do oral histories, or what they'll be is they'll have little excerpts from interviews. But it's fairly narrow in terms of what oral historians, what the output of their hours and hours and thousands of pages of work ends up looking like. So I became really interested in sort of creative ways, alternative ways of thinking about what we can do with these stories in our community. And then COVID hit, and the libraries were closed, and some of the resources that I needed to work on the sabbatical project were unavailable. I had some plans, some travel to do some of this work as well. And of course, well, that didn't happen either. So I sort of switched gears to work on a different project, and I'm kind of thrilled that that book will be out in November. So at least there was some productivity during COVID. But what I really want to do now is to kind of turn my attention back to that original project. And so what I thought I would do today is to talk to you a little bit about the oral history projects that I've done and the ways that I see this project unfurling as we move forward over the next however long it takes me to do it. Hopefully, I'd love by the time we have our next gathering of WCA, I've got some things drafted, but there's still a lot that's up in the air, especially because, as I said, some of it does require travel, and it's still a little odd traveling with COVID right now. So over the last 25 years or so, I've worked with communication students to complete 2 major community-based oral history projects. And I'm currently actually collaborating with a colleague of Chad and myself at USI, Lindsay Greer, and historian Crystal and Shefflin on a third, sort of focused in Evansville, Indiana, which is where I live. The first project was my first one. I learned all sorts of things doing it. It was a project about the Sisters of Charity of Nazareth, a group of women religious who founded the university in Louisville, Kentucky, where I was working at the time. And these were amazing women. I mean, honestly, I was a little, I wasn't sure what it was going to be like to teach at the Catholic school coming straight out of LSU grad school. But the Sisters of Charity are really remarkable, service-centered order, and they have remained throughout their 200 plus year history dedicated to education, to healthcare, to social work. And I was really intrigued at how that tradition has been supported over 200 years. How that spirit of those pioneer women in 1812 that founded what is now known as Nazareth College, Spalding University, to the sisters that were teaching and working with us at Spalding at that particular time. I mean, the charter that Mother Catherine Spalding secured in 1812 from the government in Kentucky still what enables the institution to work today. And she started a school, she started this order, she renovated a tavern that became a temporary home for women and children who were seeking relief from cholera. Under her leadership during the American Civil War, sisters cared for the wounded. And in fact, Abraham Lincoln issued an order, a letter of protection, that the sisters would not be disturbed. And actually 3 sisters were buried with full Army rights. As a result, they died in terms of their work trying to nurse those who were injured. They founded orphanages, what was known at the time as infant asylums, established new schools. They established the first 4-year college in Kentucky for women. These are women who participated in marches for civil rights and for women's rights. They were the first school in Kentucky to desegregate. They were the first to enroll those who were seeing impaired. So it's a really remarkable group. And I think, again, what's interesting is they are still exactly that active and aware. They have been very involved with Black Lives Matter in recent years. And many in the American Catholic Church are looking to the sisters to advance debates about the role of women and language in religious documents, the role of women in church, women's rights, including the right to end a pregnancy and gendered identity. And so they're really remarkable, but they're incredibly modest, as again, you might expect, about their accomplishments. One woman who, when we talked to these sisters, they were like, oh, you've got to interview Sister Mary Ransom Burke. Sister, you've got to interview her. Incidentally, she was the person who founded and brought the communication department to Spalding back in the day. And so we interviewed her, and she talked about this and that. And then I had all the sisters review their transcript, because again, it's going to be recorded, placed in the archives. And she wanted to remove every mention of I, every pronoun, even if it was literally something she did. She didn't want it to be I, she wanted it to be we. And so, these very interesting conversations with her and with the other sisters about what they'd accomplished and how that was remarked. So working with students, we interviewed over 50 individuals. Each of the interviews were about an hour and a half long. I have almost 4,000 pages of interview transcripts. Most of them are sisters. Some are university, Spalding University alumni or longtime colleagues, make up a very few of them. And these are all interviews. This project is located at Spalding University in the archives. When I moved to the University of Southern Indiana in 2000, it took me a year or two, but in 2003, I started a second project working with another group of students. But this time it was related to war and wartime service. The U.S. Veterans Administration estimates the U.S. loses approximately 1,500 U.S. vets every day, and more than a third of those are World War II veterans. And so when you consider that Indiana is ranked 16th in the nation for the number of surviving World War II vets, that Evansville, where I live, is home to the largest veteran organization in the U.S. Plus, the area is packed with contributions in terms of manufacturing. Individuals manufactured landing ship takes, P-47 fighter planes, bullets, and aircraft wings. So local people have a lot to contribute beyond veterans when you think of World War II and our World War effort. This group of students, and I collected over 75 oral histories. Most of them are World War II vets who live in Indiana, Kentucky, and Illinois. And these interviews are also housed at USI in our archives. And they have been also sent to Washington, D.C., the Library of Congress, as part of the Folk Life Center's Veterans History Projects. So each of these projects extended over 2 or 3 years with several groups of students building in part of an oral history course. But one of the things that was interesting in talking to students, both formally and informally in the hall and cafeteria, is that students saw this work as very narrowly as service work, and they weren't really getting a sort of the richness of the experience and what I was hoping they would get out of it. Most of these students, keep in mind, had never traveled out of the region. Many had never talked to a person over 50 outside of their family. So there are all sorts of remarkable experiences that the students were having, but we were having trouble sort of identifying what was really going on. They would express surprise at the discipline, both self and institutional, of the participants, and talking about things that are related to basic training or the novitiate for the sisters, that process of becoming a nun. Never been in a situation where every action, even picking up a hairpin off the floor, would require permission. They'd never been required to ration, much less forfeit goods or services, although COVID-19 may have offered us a different perspective on that. So these experiences were really different than their own, but they were having difficulty sort of bridging that chasm, and it wasn't just happening through interview. So what I did was draw on my performance studies experience to have these students perform excerpts of these interviews in class and also for the public. The idea is that performance is an epistemology, that kind of method to understand experiences, and that by attending to these performances, we can become a lot more attuned to the cultural context. And so one of the things that was astonishing is that it just offered them an opportunity to process their experiences, but to also offer that up to the public. So as a result of sort of articulating their own experiences and what they found interesting, it opened up in both cases worlds for them to dialogue with the community. For example, when the students interviewed with some of the sisters, you know, one of the people they had interviewed had passed away in the months since the interview. And one of the women, one of the sisters in the audience, you know, brought this up and started talking with the student who'd done the interview. And I think that was a real pivotal moment for them. Like, oh, wow, it's a good thing we got that interview because we would not have had that experience. And very similar things happened with our World War II vets. Some of our vets were able to come to campus and to participate in the interview. So my interest in all of this is to look for ways that we can communicate these. And the book project that I want to work on is divided into 4 parts. The first part is very typical of the kind of book that you see when you see oral histories in print, organized by theme, with short excerpts of interviews. The second chunk of the book will be more akin to a qualitative interview analysis, where we look at the interviews and we organize them and we discuss the data by themes and coding and so on. I'm most interested, which won't surprise most of you because most of you know me, at least as far as I can tell in terms of who's participating today, artistic ways. So I'm looking at documentaries and the way that documentary film uses oral histories or performances, things like Anna Devere Smith's Twilight or Fires in the Mirror. I'm looking at those kinds of sort of stage performances, podcasts even as well. And then the last thing are experimental. So I'm interested in sort of intertextual, abstract, contemporary things that we can put, where we can put unexpected things together or do experimental things. 2 examples, if you saw Peter Jackson's 2018 movie, They Shall Not Grow Old, the way that some of those texts are sort of layered. That the Kachala has just written an autoethnographic book using oral histories to talk about India's partition. So I'm wanting to sort of look at these 4 different strategies for sharing stories and writing stories beyond that usual one where we see oral histories. And then what I like to do at the end of each is to actually give a long-term, a more extended rather, example of each of them, drawing from the SCN and World War II project. So that sort of ties those together. And that's kind of why I talked about those for extended period of time. So that really concludes what I wanted to talk about. I'd hoped at this conference I would actually have be a little bit farther along to talk in more specific detail, but that's my plan, and that's what I'm working with and how I'm using stories as they relate to oral histories.
Well, thank you, Dr. Howard, for your presentation. You really fulfilled the, the time. 15 minutes sharp, which is amazing. I'm not sure I'll be able to do that, but I will try my best. I will just summarize what you have already presented. You're sharing here your experience as a lecturer with more than 20 years of experience in teaching and high educational settings. And your interest is in how then educational settings can design strategies to document history in the community involving students. So then they can interact with the people who lived interesting moments of history in the US, such as the Black Lives Matter, the role of women in church, the sisters, with important moments in the US, such as the World War II, and the role that they played as nurses and the social work that they did, as well as the war veterans. And how interesting it is to see the gains that the students have by being in conversation with these people who have many things to share, as well as convey this story to the young generation. So your interest is to understand even how media, such as documentary films, can serve as ways to, in a sense of artistic way, document this kind of oral history. I hope I have summarized it well. I'm sorry for my English, but this is what basically Dr. Howard shared with us. I'm not sure if we can proceed, so then we hear all of us and then we launch questions, or we launch questions now and then we proceed. What do you think? We proceed? Okay, so I will invite now Salome Abkazishvili
Really.
from Shvili from Chai Kana Media. Hi, Salome. You have also 15 minutes.
Thank you. Thank you, Tanya. Thank you, everyone, for being here, wherever you are. Good morning, good afternoon, good evening. This is my pleasure to be here on this panel with my professors, and because my time at USI, yeah, this was amazing, and the researcher that I am right now, so this is related to University of Southern Indiana. So it's my pleasure to be here with my professors today. So I'm trying to share the presentations that I prepared, and let me just look at. Okay, sorry for that. Is it okay if I share the presentation that I already started sharing? So my presentation and my topic, sorry. So it's called Storytelling, as you see on my title, and I will talk about political caricatures from the Republic of Georgia, the countries that I am from and I live right now. And as you see in this title, there is two domains in this title. There is history and storytelling. And when I look at this term as a whole, I see that none of these domains can live with each other. So history cannot be survived without telling, and storytelling needs some stories and history. So while talking about this from this perspective, my research tried to underline the importance of caricature as a medium, or cartoon as a medium, to help history to be told, and caricature as an important, as a powerful storytelling tool. But before I go into details, what I've done in my research, I just want to briefly talk about how important this research became to me, because it just started as an MA thesis, master thesis in 2016, but turned out that it became very important for local communities and in my home city, TEDx Tbilisi. So that they invited me to give a talk about this topic, and then I also received an offer from local publishing house where I collaborated with them, and there is a catalog which came out. It was published in 2019, and after that, this book turned out that this was selected as an finalist in the national book competition. This was last year. So, and right now I'm presenting the same topic at the World Communication Association conference, and I feel like I have this privilege to continue talking about this topic, and I'm lucky to have this opportunity to talk about this topic even nowadays after 4 years of kind of work on this research. So my research inquiry when I started working on this project was to understand what are the national topics and national narrative. What is a national narrative in these Georgian political caricatures? And you see this specific time that I've selected for my research. And the methodology that I used for collecting the data and to find out all this, to answer to my inquiry, was content analysis. And as you see on this picture, I analyzed around 20 different caricature magazines that were published in Georgia centuries ago. And I kind of analyzed more than 1,000 caricatures. And again, before I talk about what I found in this caricature and why these findings are important or why they matter, I just want to give you the context, our attendees and the panel presenters, to give you the context about the country, because when I'm talking about the importance of caricatures, it is important to know the context of this country, right? So the country of Georgia as a modern independent country, as it is right now, it has this ancient roots. So we have historical records where there is this records that there was the kingdom of Georgia, and in between of 10th to 12th centuries. After that, we had some rivals and some conflict with neighboring nations and countries. And after that, we had, so Georgia became part of Russian Empire. In the beginning of 20th century, we had very short stage or short period of independence. And this is called the First Democratic Republic of Georgia, which is very richly represented in Georgian political caricatures. And this short independence was ended by the Sovietization of Georgia, and which we all know that, so this lasted for about 70 years. Which again followed by regaining independence. And nowadays we live in this independent republic of independent country with a parliamentary governance system. But we're still developing this democracy in this country. So this was just a context to give you the context where I'm from. And I will focus on this very particular moment of the history, because I believe that when I was doing my research on caricatures and what gave the emergence of or what gave birth of these political caricatures, it is important to note that this was a time when there is important things happening in the empire, the Russian Empire. We have a very antagonistic attitudes regarding monarchy. And this picture you see on the right side of my slide, this represents all these antagonistic movements in within the Russian Empire. And on the left side of my slide, you see the caricature, which of course, this is part of my research. And I'm not even trying to translate the caption because it's very long. It requires specific knowledge of English, so I won't even try to translate it literally, but just to translate the narrative and shortly to summarize, it says that so it has this antagonistic attitude towards Emperor Nicholas and his wife, which you see they are depicted on this caricature. And there's some important theoretical kind of theories and theoretical backgrounds that I used when I was working on this research. And this is two famous modernist theorists, Marshall McLuhan and Benedict Anderson. But first of all, I will talk about McLuhan because when I was trying to see the connection between nationalism and media and caricature in this case, I could not avoid Marshall McLuhan, who directly and said that print media can be used as an architect of nationalism. And he even devoted one chapter in his book, this topic. And of course, Benedict Anderson, who was talking about this imagined community and how print media can connect different communities or people within the community. So this was guiding theoretical principles I followed when I was working on this research. And of course, very important piece of my research was related to this book. This is Art of Controversy by Viktor Navasky. And why I liked this book is that when I was working on this research, I was observing 1,000 caricatures, and I had this vast amount of information, and I didn't have answers to those questions that I had while I was doing this research. So I was very much lost in this ocean of information. And when I found out about this book, everything was cleared up. Everything I found a lot of answers to my questions. And one of the important ideas that he had in this book, and I just brought it on my slide, is about the power of caricature and visual media. So, and another kind of like a quote that I decided to put on my slide is that caricature has a lot of power, and it is so powerful that it can also reach to the poorest members of society, because typically reading the caricature does not require the skills, literacy skills, right? So you just watch this image and you somehow have this understanding what is going on there. So that's how the caricature how powerful the caricature is. So right now I will just a little bit stop talking, and I will just let you to look at this caricature that is part of my research, and which I found in one of these old political caricature magazines in Georgia. And then I will continue to talk about the major topics that emerged in this research. So these are my translation. I did my best, but I hope it just gives you this understanding of what's on these caricatures. Speaking of topics related to this nationalism, I just outlined four basic ideas that emerged in this visual media. The first one is that this is the beginning. When I looked at these caricatures, there was no need to read the history. Of course, I needed some contextual knowledge, but you could easily tell that there was this harsh discussion going on between political parties about the idea of autonomy. And this was the beginning of establishing first political parties and the establishing of first political culture in Georgia. And caricatures did a great job to reflect all these discussions between different political parties. Another important topic is that there was territorial claims between Georgians and neighboring nations and countries. And when you look at these caricatures and captions, you can also tell that there is this discourse of us versus them, which is also a very important part of this identity politics and nationalistic rhetoric. First, Democratic Republic of Georgia, it's like the very important part of Georgian political caricatures. When you look at around 200 caricatures that I was observing, touched this topic, how the idea of republic was born and how it's developed and how it's died in a short time period. And of course, Soviet Russia is a big national threat, and the caricatures and its authors are emphasizing on that. And one of the caricatures that you saw a couple of minutes ago, this was also reflecting the same idea. And just to conclude, why all this information that I found there is important, and why it matters to me, and why it matters to my community or the society, right? So in this just short time that I spent on this research, it was around 5-6 months that it took me to work on this research. I was impressed that I encountered the amount of information that told me that caricature is a work of art, and Georgian authors and Georgian caricaturists, they perfectly managed to do that, to show caricature as a work of art, because in nowadays Georgia, you cannot really see the same quality caricatures in the print media, not even on online media. So I was impressed that, and centuries ago, Georgian caricaturists managed to do that, managed to show us that caricature is a work of art. And the second point I want to make is that caricature is a powerful media which can be used to tell the story. Because sometimes, as I said, I didn't even need to read the text. Of course, again, it's important to know the contextual knowledge, but sometimes you just look at the caricature and it just tells the story. And another important and last point that I'm going to make is that caricature is a weapon for mass mobilization, because this was a time when, as I said, national idea was about to establish, and Georgian society was establishing, and this idea of national identity was developing. So caricature played an important role to mobilize the mass amount of people and to mobilize around one idea. Because when we talk about nationalism, we cannot avoid mass mobilization. We cannot, and when we talk about mass mobilization, we cannot avoid media. And visual media plays an important role in this case. So this is actually what my research showed me, is that all these three important points were made in these caricatures. And I was again impressed that it happened centuries ago in my home country, in a field which I represent, because I was working as a journalist. I consider my identity as a journalist. So I was impressed, and I'm just happy to share these impressions with you. Thank you. If you have any questions, I can always answer later.
Oh, thank you, Salome, for your presentation, your interesting presentation. I learned a lot about Georgia in 15 minutes, actually 20. And what you shared with us was the importance of caricature in the consolidation of nationalism in Georgia. And you told us how the caricatures serve to tell stories and mobilize people in important moments of Georgia history and consolidation of its democracy and republic. And four main moments. Four main moments the caricature served, namely the political political parties contest for autonomy, the territorial claims, where you build a sense of who we are in difference to who they are. The first democratic republic of Georgia, and the Soviet Russia as a national threat. And you conclude by telling us that caricature is a work of art that had a massive importance in the Georgia history, so that the Georgia history relies on these caricature stories. So then there is a direct link between nationalism, narratives, and stories that the caricature as a visual art aim to bring together people to understand a specific moment of Georgia. I hope I was able to summarize it
Yeah,
correctly.
it was perfect. Thank you.
And well, I think it's my turn. I also have I also have uh, um, screen to share. This one. I don't know if all you can see it. Can everyone see it? Okay, so my topic is about Cyclone Idai. It's a comparing study of national and international media coverage of humanitarian crisis in Mozambique. I believe everyone heard about this cyclone in 2019. So why is it important? Because communication scholars are still debating the need for transformation, the ways Western media informs and communicate the world about African countries. So, so it's still pertinent to discuss the ways in which Western media keeps overtly or subtly conveying neoliberal and colonial perspective of the continent, of my continent. And from what I read to do this project, I couldn't see a link between what Western media do and what African media also do when talking about humanitarian disasters. What I only see was complainings and criticism against the bad work that Western media do when relating to humanitarian crises in all underdeveloped countries. So that I think that it is time to include in the debate of media criticism analysis of comparing analysis of how African media organizations portrays humanitarian disasters, so that it can be visible the things that are not visible in the Western media organizations when dealing with humanitarian crisis. For example, what my study shows is that, in fact, Mozambican media organizations tend to guarantee the sovereignty and show how Mozambican citizens are in fact engaged in supporting the victims of humanitarian crisis. So the Mozambican journalism shows the agency of the state of Mozambique in supporting the victims, which is completely uh, invisible in the Western media coverage. So the goal of this paper is, on one hand, to engage in a comparing framing perspective between Western media coverage and the Mozambican media coverage regarding humanitarian crisis caused by Idai cyclone, and problematizes the exclusion of signs of African agency in moments of crisis. On the other side, the paper interrogates the paradox caused by the lack of debates in the Western media organizations and Mozambican media organizations regarding the reasons why the African states are not able to lessen decades after decades the dependency on external help to manage regular humanitarian crises. So I think we all know what Cyclone Idai caused in Mozambique, Malawi, Zimbabwe, and Madagascar. But specifically in Mozambique, the damage were worse. And it started on March the 14th. So this is a study case of Cyclone Idai. And I use framing theory, representation theory, and critical discourse. I analyzed BBC and The Guardian online newspapers, and I analyzed 2 private television news, Miramar TV and STV. Why private? Because our public or media organizations here suffer lots of interference from the main political parties. So it wouldn't be so well to use them in this study. And why television and not newspapers? Since I used BBC and The Guardian as online newspapers, because it's easy to access and it's free. Comparing to newspapers here in Mozambique. So I use 12 news, 3 from each media organization. And I generated 3 categories of analysis, namely source of information as an indicator of the interests and ideologies of Western and Mozambican media organizations, solidarity overlapping the space for accountability, and the absence and the presence of the other suffering as a space to debate possibilities of balanced and fair journalism in humanitarian crisis settings. So regarding the first category, source of information as an indicator of the interests and ideologies of Western and Mozambican media organizations, I define it as a way to understand that both Western and Mozambican media organizations include and exclude sources of information according to the specific interpretation and representation that they want to give in regards to humanitarian crisis. This is directly linked to the frame theory per se. So I give here an example that the Guardian newspaper mentioned or quoted. So they quoted WHO. Some 900,000 doses of oral cholera vaccines were due to arrive in the cyclone battered Beira city on Tuesday. And then the site, senior Mozambican health official saying that vaccination against cholera begins on Wednesday in Beira. And then again, WHO, the next few weeks are crucial and speed is of the essence if we are to save lives and limit suffering. So this kind of framing sustains the ideology of active rich countries and passive rich countries. In fact, the senior official representing the Mozambican state is acting after the intervention of the international organization. And the presence of Mozambican source is in fact to reinforce the embedded idea that nothing happens if there is no intervention of international aid. So it's again a passive way to say that and a senior official representing the government of Mozambique was not doing anything besides waiting from WHO to bring vaccines. So then the vaccination would start. I bring here the other side of the Mozambican media perspectives. They didn't cite any international agency as source of information. Instead, they focused on the role that government and the other national public and private institutions were doing to assist the victims. However, all the government officials or sources of information used to refer themselves to the support that they were receiving from international aid. So one example here is that the journalist from Miramar TV, the journalist presents the newscast saying that the director of the National Institute for Catastrophe Management informs that the government has made available 3 million meticais to support the humanitarian teams in the field. And the director is quoted by saying that they are thankful for receiving also the support from other international partners that achieved almost 1.5 million USDs. So the intention here is to consolidate and reinforce the patriotic spirit and the idea of sovereignty of the state and that the government is doing everything to assist its citizens. 300 million comparing to 1.5 million USDs, there is no comparison. But then the journalists prefer to use this agency of the government of giving this money to support the teams instead of using the amount of money that international organizations gave. So I conclude this category of analysis saying that the values that prevail in both Western and African countries are reflected through media and media coverage of transnational issues. And media coverage of transnational issues constitute opportunities to debate the ways in which global knowledge and information regarding Western and non-Western countries are framed and representing, and the fact that the Western coverage of humanitarian disasters reinforce the Afro-pessimistic perceptions globally. The second category of analysis is solidarity overlapping the space for accountability. It means that both Western and Mozambican media organizations were focused on reporting the severity of the damage, and by this way showing their humanism and solidarity. And I quote Nevins that defend that by producing and reproducing certain kinds of imagery, historical hierarchies of power relations can be normalized and naturalized. And here we are talking about the way things are rather than the way we have constructed things to be. So the lack of in-depth debates on the role that both Mozambican and international agencies in preventing severe humanitarian crises due to cyclones reinforces the idea that poor countries are never prepared to prevent huge humanitarian disasters. But here it's important to refer that UNICEF, WFP, WHO work permanently here in Mozambique, regardless of having or not having humanitarian disasters. So there is no explanation why it's not possible to reduce the risk for humanitarian crisis when natural disasters happen, because they are here all the time. So these kind of questions are not visible in the media debates. The third category is the absence and the presence of the other suffering as a space to debate the possibility of balanced and fair journalism in humanitarian crises. Here I mean that both Mozambican and Western media organizations, as well as the process of training journalists, should take into consideration issues related to ethics and fair journalism when reporting situations of suffering. And here, the journalists from Mozambique always try to avoid describing the victims. They gave voice, they interviewed the victims, but they never presented them. They just showed the interview that they did with the victims. But both BBC and The Guardian tended to describe the victims and then give them voice to say what they have experienced. And I gave here some examples. So there is this lady who said that I was able to rescue all my children and sisters. And after that, we looked for shelter in a house nearby. So it shows that actually people are trying to save their lives. They are not waiting to be told what to do. They are fighting to find shelter. They are trying to do something to save their lives. It is completely different from the perspective that both The Guardian and BBC brought, because they just analyzed the lack of agency of the victims. And here I bring another example. She's still dealing with the trauma of losing her grandparents and niece to the tropical storm. And the victim says they couldn't hold on the tree where we were sitting, and the wind pushed them into the water. So it reinforces again the lack of agency of the victims. So the Western journalism gives more space to describe the victims according to their perspectives, and the voices that they give to the victims is to show their impotence. On the other side, it is important to refer that the victims also see the Western white journalists as the other savior, and they frame the discourses accordingly. So the victims victimizes themselves whenever they understand that they are being interviewed by white foreign journalists. And I give here an example. Um, everyone we come across here is is begging us to come into their homes to show us what they have lost and how nature has stolen from them. We are the only people they have seen since the cyclone hit on Thursday. Please help us. The world, show the world we are suffering. We don't know where we are going to sleep, says a victim. And the journalist ends by saying, the residents here feel like they have been forgotten. So I conclude that it is important to recognize that in situations such as humanitarian crisis, it is difficult to separate the role of journalists, both Mozambicans and Westerns, to provide solidarity frames, while not emerging in the process of treating the victims as exotic and different. It is important to find a balance and ethics during the framing process so that the reality is shown and debated in all possible ways. Patriotic and economic supremacy ideologies will always be present in Mozambican and Western media frames and representations of reality. However, it is possible to lessen traits of discrimination and exclusion of the right to dignity and sovereignty that all nations have regardless of their economic status. So this is what I have prepared to share with you. I hope I may have fulfilled the time. I'm not able to. And that's all. I don't know if anyone can summarize what I said or I just proceed. Well, if anyone doesn't want to summarize what I said, I will just call Dr. Chad Shu from USI to present. And you have 15 minutes. I'm not sure I fulfilled 15 minutes. Sorry if I didn't.
Thank you, Tanya. Okay, let me just share the screen here. Okay. I was loading. Okay, so what I'll be talking about today is about journalism and the storytelling and the power really to change the narrative. If you really looked at the numbers of journalists who have been killed since the 1990s, it would seem as if the world is really a dangerous place for journalists, that the profession is dangerous, that the violence is growing, and it would give you the idea that journalism is a very dangerous profession. But that would actually give you kind of the wrong picture if you just looked at the numbers, what's really going on. Instead, what has happened over time has actually been more hopeful. Since the 1980s, what has happened is that there are now World Press Freedom Organizations, or these are some of the major ones that I'm giving here. The Committee to Protect Journalists was a very early one in 1981. And then the Reporters Without Borders is a French-based organization. And the International Press Institute came later. You can see the outlier here is from 1926. I was more, the IFJ is more like a union. But these are non-governmental organizations that work with UNESCO. And this is, although I'm just listing here the major NGOs here, you have to imagine that we have spreadsheets full of these organizations in a lot of different countries. Most countries have some kind of press freedom organization. So, as I was saying, if you look at the numbers of journalists who have died since the 1990s, it looks bleak. It looks like a dangerous profession. But there's something actually very hopeful going on with the formation of these press freedom organizations and the way they work with the UNESCO. And what has happened is these organizations, all the IGO and the NGOs listed here, they basically form a communication network that is actually able to report and monitor what has been happening with the security of journalists. Now, this story here, as you can see here, a lot of these organizations formed in the 1980s. There's a background story to this hopefulness. A lot of what Tanya was talking about with the view from the outside, big organizations, the Western organizations characterizing what's going on in Mozambique and Africa, takes away oftentimes the voice of the Africans, in this case, in Mozambique, the Mozambique journalists. Well, in the 1970s, this was perceived as a major problem. And what happened in the UNESCO at that time was that there was this idea of new world information order. What if we could change the balance of how much power the Western organizations have to influence the stories told about the third world and non-aligned countries? So this was a big issue during the 1970s. It created a problem when they got to the ideas of working out the implementation. And a controversy arose specifically over licensing. Now, the idea here in the New World Information Order was you have to protect the journalists. So one way is to do that is to license them, make sure they report to a standard so that the governments couldn't just commit violence in the name of protecting their autonomy. So this issue in particular was one that spilled over, and the United States and the UK in particular at one point in the mid-80s actually pulled out of UNESCO. So at that point, that's in the mid-80s, you have these press freedom organizations that were actually starting to take the foothold, as I showed you in the last presentation, in the last slide. So as you can see, what I was just talking about was that the framing, the way the New World Information Order framed the security of journalists was one of protection. We have to protect journalists. The way the Press Freedom Network started framing this issue was we really have to maximize press freedom. So one of the areas that interests me in this narrative is the way that the press freedom organizations and UNESCO has worked with our sense of memory. Barbie Zelizer was a scholar who worked with memory and journalism, and she focused on how journalism is actually a carrier of memory. So it makes this, it records the story, it's a record of the day, and yet the very processes of journalism also embed public memory. And along the same vein, Sturkin around the same time really focused in on these practices. A lot of public memory and history focuses on memorials, like for instance, the statues, the Civil War statues would be a typical topic that they would deal with. But Barbie Zelizer and Sturkin are both focused on these practices. And journalism offers a very good basis for that. So here's how it works in practice. When journalists are killed, or when their rights are trampled on, what happens is these press freedom organizations actually monitor this. They record and they keep websites and data on what has actually happened. UNESCO issues a statement about every single journalist killed. And all of these press freedom organizations, they issue reactions, they keep tallies, they summarize key events, they generate annual reports. All of those generate actual news stories. So it's almost acting like a public relations firm, getting that information out to the journalists in a packaged form. One journalist, Roy Greenslade, he has a regular column in The Guardian in the UK. And what he does oftentimes is take this information from these press freedom organizations. And basically what he does is he writes a column based on those. And these stories find themselves being published throughout the world with the major news organizations like the Agence France Presse, Associated Press, Reuters, some of the major news agencies. In addition, there are anniversaries, there are commemorative dates that all work with our public memory of what has happened in the past to journalists. A key narrative that comes out of this is a rhetorical strategy of lament. Galczynski wrote about lament as a rhetorical strategy. And he wrote about how it connects with the larger human rights agendas, but also lament and the way that these messages are delivered actually help us to spread these stories, to spread these ideas, but not, yeah, they do they do deliver this information about killed journalists. But one thing they spread in the positive sense, in the hopeful sense, is they allow us to actually to to look at the countries and how press freedom can be something of a virtue, and it can spread. And so when the press freedom organizations not only work to get that information out, but they also go to the United Nations human rights organizations. And when every country is being evaluated every so many years, these press freedom organizations actually provide the evidence for those evaluations. So in a sense, it's kind of like a feedback loop, that these stories that seem to give us the idea that journalists are being killed all the time and it's a dangerous profession, are also feeding in the idea that there's this value of press freedom, and these countries need to reach higher in order to get to that level. Now, there are just some other strategies being offered here. Windhoek from the Namibia conference issued a declaration in 1991 that pretty much talked about this maximizing press freedom as an ideal. And one of the ways it suggested doing that was having a World Press Freedom Day. That came to fruition 2 years later when the United Nations General Assembly voted on it. So every May 3rd now, there is an event all over the world in all the different countries focusing in on world press freedom. That also generates more news content. In addition, with that, there's a freedom prize that goes typically to people who've had their rights violated. The idea of memorializing journalists is just another way in which public memory works, and is just another strategy. Now, this happened a long time ago in the 1800s already in the UK. There was a memorial established at the St. Bride's Church. This is on Fleet Street, which is where all the newspapers were. It was pretty much the publishing street, if you didn't know London. Those typically were UK soldiers who died abroad. The very first one was war in Africa that was fought. The Press Freedom Organization, the French one, the Reporters Without Borders, actually founded a memorial, an international memorial for all those journalists killed since World War II. Now, they located this in Bayeux, France. Bayeux is also the home of the Bayeux Tapestry that records the French and British wars from the early centuries. So it's always been housed in Bayeux. So it became kind of this site of memory for the emergence of the UK. This city is also important because it houses the cemeteries, being not so far away from the beaches where the Allied forces landed in Normandy. And so just to the right of these monuments, on the other side of the fence, there is a cemetery there. And it holds the bodies of, in this cemetery, British and German soldiers who died in that offensive. So Bayeux, in a way, physically is a storehouse of memory. And the Reporters Without Border use that site to also create a memory for killed journalists. And they have a celebration every year for press freedom, and of course they deliver prizes there for notable journalists. And just about this idea of maximizing freedom, the site here has this quote from Simone de Beauvoir, and it pretty much capsulizes what the main idea of the framing has been. One may only taste freedom when others around the world around us, are free. Maximizing freedom for everyone, spreading that idea that freedom is possible. So in conclusion, what I think these strategies illustrate is how making the dangers of journalism visible through this announcing, exposing, commemorating, it's really being used to create what Jack Donnelly called an overlapping consensus. There are so many countries with so many different contexts, so many different rules, so many different traditions, and yet by making this an international effort, there's a consensus that's growing around the world about what that press freedom could mean. So whereas, if you just look at the numbers, it's depressing. But if you look actually at the messages that are created by this communication network, it's absolutely hopeful. And that's where I want to leave this group and just say that there is hope. Things can get better.
Thank you, Dr. Tu, for your presentation. It was really interesting to me to connect this idea that you bring here in regards to how this idea of a dangerous place, a world as a dangerous place to journalists generates actually a network that can value the lives of journalists in different ways. As you mentioned here, we have memorials, we have prizes, we have all these reports that actually values the lives and the work of freedom of expression in almost all countries. And here, so the consensus is that there is a power in the journalist storytelling, so that makes this profession dangerous, but at the same time, how the networks are being able to use this kind of pessimistic way of viewing the profession as a way to value the profession itself, but at the same time, the virtue of being free to express what you want to express. I believe I try to say what you defend in your presentation.
Thank you, Tanya.
So I think, yeah, I think many of us left, but I believe that we are open to receive questions, comments, and any other kind of compliments to the work that we did. So the session is open. I have a question to Salome. Based on my experience, actually, caricatures or cartoons here in Mozambique, they are seen as humoristic uh, kind of visual arts, and people really just see it as a way to make jokes, specifically to politicians. So
Mhm.
I want to understand. I want to understand how it really worked as a way of mobilizing people to take action in regards to the construction of nationalism in Georgia, because here in Mozambique people don't take action, people just laugh at it. So I want to understand how it worked, or how it works in Georgia.
Yeah, I would say to laugh to me is it's also to take an action, because when you express something, when you laugh, you express your thoughts, your opinion, what's your attitude regarding the one particular political person or one or subject or one particular political group. So this is to me already an action, because laugh, what I found in this whole research is that when you laugh, you express yourself. And this is a very powerful way of expression. But to answer your question, this is a very important question. And this is the question I had when I started working on this research. But this is very hard to answer, because, as I said, my research and all these materials that I've collected, this was centuries ago. And it is really hard to look back and see how it really changed people's mind, how it really affected this nationalistic views. But again, that's why I brought a lot of theoretical knowledge in my research to emphasize that print media, visual media, caricature, it's always, this is an important, powerful tool for mass mobilization. How it affected Georgian community, how what were the impact and what was the impact and what were the results, this is hard to measure centuries later, because this society doesn't exist. So it's really hard to make these assumptions. But knowing again how powerful this medium is, we can tell that this was there was some plan or strategy behind these political cartoonists to influence society, because they were bringing these nationalistic ideas and topics in this in their agenda. It was clear. That's what I saw. But measuring impact, it's hard.
Tanya, I was wondering, when you're looking at the different data that you could have looked at, what is the I don't know. I mean, what is the what are kind of new technologies are people using there, like cell phones, um, even the old SMS or the new smartphones? Are people getting information that way too, besides the newspapers, besides the local television? What actually else is going on there in terms of technology?
Thank you, Dr. Tew. It's an interesting question. Well, you may know that Mozambique is a underdeveloped country. However, in the big cities, actually, people are really using technology, even as now an education system in all levels, from primary to the higher levels. We are now, because of COVID, invited to use and maximize the use of technologies. And for information is not different. Specifically, young people, they use a lot cell phones. And for those who have computers, because many young people don't have computers, but they have cell phones. For those who have computers, they always use computer to seek for information, or by information, I mean anything, entertainment, games, so to interact with the world. Specifically to the countries that speak Portuguese, Brazil and Portugal. Because I understand your question as an inclusion to the global conversations regarding the communication flow. But the fact is that we don't feel that this kind of new technology helps to actually, even in Brazil and Portugal, they receive our content. One of the things that I saw in my study is that whenever it's not possible to have a correspondent here in Mozambique, the BBC specifically used official sources, was able to use official sources here in Mozambique to give the first images, the first information about what was going on during the cyclone Idai. So whenever it is necessary to talk with the Mozambicans about what is going on in Mozambique, it is the space is open. But when they come with their correspondent, they just forget about this kind of conversations with Mozambicans. They talk about with the international organizations. So I think I answered.
Okay, yes, thank you.
Yeah, yeah.
Well, that's we're pretty much out of time. So
Yes. Yes.
thank you all for
Thank you.
participating in this, and for the audience. This has been recorded so other people can look at it when they're waking up and they can access it. So it'll be there in storage. It's been nice seeing you both again, Salome.
Thank you so much,
And also
Tanya
Tanya.
and Dr. Till, for leading this session, and for
Okay.
attendees who joined us.
Yes, thank you, everybody.
Take
Okay,
care and
take care.
Bye.
Bye.
See you. Take
Bye.
care.
Thank you.
Bye.
Bye bye.